it's nerve-wracking, even if you've done it 20 times before. And it should be, because you're talking about something very important that's going to affect your livelihood and how you live over the next, several years working for that particular company. So, you may go in there and your hands are shaking and your palms are sweaty, but that's par for the course.
Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that empowers professional women to rise. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and in this show, I take you undercover into the stories and lessons that I learned, sometimes the hard way, throughout my career. I also talk with working women, leaders, and coaches to show you that no matter what your struggle is, and no matter what your career goals are, you already have all the talent that you need to succeed. For a lot of people, negotiating salary can be really, really scary. And it goes so far beyond just knowing the steps. I can tell you from my experience that I took negotiation classes in law school and learned from really talented people and professors about how to negotiate and how it all works and what you're supposed to do. And that didn't always help me because I had a lot of fear around asking for more and asking for more money. And I think that a lot of women have the same fears that I have. And one thing that's really important for me is to normalize some of those fears and to normalize those difficult feelings that I think a lot of us have when it comes to the topic of money and our jobs and how much we're making and how much we want to ask for and how much we believe we're worth. If there's anyone out there who is on this journey of learning to negotiate, whether you're learning the steps and the technicalities behind it and how to position yourself when you're talking about salary or asking for more. Or maybe you know the steps, but like I did, you're struggling a little bit feeling confident and brave enough to ask for what you want. Maybe it feels really scary to you. Regardless of where you're at, I've been there and so many other women have been there. And it's really important for me to help as many women as I possibly can by showing them that all of this is normal. It's normal for it to be hard. And by sharing as much information as I possibly can on how to ask for more and get paid what you are worth. And I'm super lucky because today's guest, Regina, is a triple threat. Regina is a podcaster, and you'll hear about her podcast in this conversation. And she's built her career in HR, which means she knows all about negotiation from the HR side and shares tons of incredibly useful information that we can use to get better at negotiating and get better at making sure we're asking for our worth. And she's a working woman. And in this conversation, she opens up about where negotiating and asking for more salary has been hard for her. You're going to get tons of tactical advice in this conversation and hopefully tons of encouragement and inspiration that inspires you to believe that you are worth the salary that you want to earn. And that when it comes time to ask for more, whenever that might be, you deserve it. And even if it's scary, you still can do it. I loved this conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it, and I'll catch you at the end.
My name is Regina Romeo. I'm a human resources director, human resources professional, and expert witness. So I work full-time as the director of human resources, and I work part-time as an expert witness in employment law and labor cases. I also host a podcast, Office Politics Radio, and my career kind of goes back quite a way. I've been in human resources for over 20 years now. So all of my professional real jobs have been in human resources. I started working for the state of California as a personnel specialist, what seems like 100 years ago, and got a lot of really good generalist experience in the area of human resources. I've worked for the Department of Justice, for the Attorney General in employment regulation. And I spent about 16 years working for Los Angeles County in different HR capacities. So when I left there, I moved back to Northern California about, gosh, almost 2 years ago. So then I became the director of human resources for a county in Northern California for a year. And now I'm in my current position as a director of human resources for a consulting firm.
Wonderful. So you've had a really deep experience in human resources, clearly so many years working in it. And I would love to hear from you what you've kind of learned and observed over those years about salary and about negotiating salary, both, from the side of being an HR professional and just as a working woman yourself.
Salary negotiations, I guess the most important thing to understand is that you only get to negotiate your salary one time for that job. So it's really important that you do your legwork and kind of figure out where that company or organization is and what they're looking for and what value you can bring to that position. So for the most part, an organization will have a range of what they're willing to pay for that particular position, classification, or to have those job duties performed. And you have to do your work beforehand to figure out if you're undervaluing what your time is going to be worth or overvaluing. So it's just like when you're putting your house on the market and you want to look at what the comps are in your neighborhood to figure out where in the market your house is going to be acceptable to be sold or an acceptable price to ask for. And as a human resources person, I already have a range in mind, and most of the time, or a lot of the time, I should say, the range will be posted with the job opportunity. And if it's not, there's still going to be other ways that you can find out what is reasonable in the marketplace to expect a position like that to pay. So, for example, if you're going to be an accountant in Cincinnati, Ohio, you want to do your market research to figure out, okay, an entry level accountant in Cincinnati makes X amount of dollars per year. I'm bringing in, this type of experience or this level of education and what have you. And that is what I'm going to ask for when I go into negotiations. So as a candidate or as an employee, I always do my legwork on the organization and what the market will bear. As an HR person, I've seen people come in and ask for things, it's a range. You see people ask for things that are completely unreasonable and they're never going to happen. And then you have other people who, justify what they're asking for with the research that they've done. So it's more about the conversation between you and the hiring manager or the hiring authority to get to a point where you both agree that something is reasonable and acceptable versus trying to, like I said, like overprice yourself or something like that for a position that's just never going to pay that amount.
That makes a lot of sense. If somebody's feeling a little fuzzy and they're feeling like, okay, I want to kind of figure out where my range is, but I don't know where it is, are there places or steps that they could take to try to gather more information on that?
You can definitely go online and look at what some of the job postings are for your particular field and for your region and for your years of experience. So, an entry level, like I said, an entry level accountant is going to be different than maybe a senior accountant or a managing accountant and things like that. And those types of jobs are posted all over job boards and they have an associated salary with them. So, you can easily find that information. But what tends to happen in the negotiation is people think about what their particular value is, where it's like, okay, well, I'm worth $1 million, so I'm going to come in and ask for something that may be outside of the range of what that company is willing to pay you. And it's the same way, using the house analogy again, if it's a house that you grew up in and it has a lot of sentimental value, you're going to try to overprice it to say, I want $800,000 for this house. But if every house in a 3 mile radius is selling for 250,000, then you have to be more reasonable about what the market will bear.
That makes a lot of sense. So there's kind of the employer side of it, and then there's what you think you're worth, and figuring out where those meet and how to put something out that reflects your value but isn't unreasonable, and like you said, not reflecting the value of the house or the value of you.
Right, right. Because I mean, I remember when I was selling my car a couple years ago. I had my last car for 14 years. I love that car. It was it was everything. And when I went to trade it in, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this car is priceless. Y'all should be giving me thousands of dollars. But when I was sitting down with the salesman, he was like, so we're going to give you $1,000 because at the end of the day, it's a 14-year-old car with 160,000 miles on it. So the market would not bear, what I felt the car was worth because what it meant to me personally versus what it was really going to be worth in the real world. For the rest of the world, they don't care about, my feelings and the attachment to the car. There's no price you could put on that at the sales office, unfortunately.
Oh, I totally relate. I feel like my car is like a human.
Right. It's like part of my, existence. So
Do you see people undervaluing and actually not realizing that they can aim a bit higher in terms of their salary ask?
not so much, especially not these days because there's so much information out there that you can really figure out beforehand what the base salary for a position is. So I've never really had anyone come in and say that they want something that's under market. If I'm making an offer, I probably will offer something to you at the beginning of the salary range and then see where we go from there. So you may come back and say, well, I want 5% more or 10% more. And then I have to see if that's going to be something that we can, when you make your counter offer, if that's something that would also be acceptable. But undervalue, not really so much.
And once that initial number goes out, it sounds like there's definitely room there to respond to it. So definitely think about what you might want to come back with. When I was earlier in my career, I didn't know you were supposed to do that. I was like, cool.
Right.
Okay, this looks great.
Right. And it's just like, oh, okay, I'll take that. So in the back office between human resources and finance, there's a range that's already assigned to every position that we have. So there's going to be a base range, at the beginning, and then it will go up to, from X amount of dollars to Y amount of dollars. So you have to come in somewhere in there. So if I'm sending you a letter and saying, okay, this is X amount of dollars, and you come back and say, well, I want X plus 5%, as long as we haven't gotten to the Y amount of dollars, then we're probably still okay because the range is there so that you can advance over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however long it takes you to get to the max of that position. But that has to already be in what's budgeted or what we're willing to pay for that position. So if you come in, so if I offer you X and you automatically go to Y, maybe that might still work. If you go to Y plus 5% or plus 10%, then I'm going to have to counter offer again and bring you back down to the Y amount of dollars.
And this kind of goes back to what you were saying before, too, which is having as much information as possible, because the more information you have, the more you can go through that process and kind of have an idea of where you're going to end up landing and kind of anchor your asks around that.
Right. And you're going to look at your current salary. So in California, I can't ask you what your current salary is, but I can ask you what your expectations are for this new position that you're taking on. And obviously, most employees or workers are going to want to have their salary at minimum matched and then have an increase on top of that. So, it's not often that you have an employee who's coming in with a lot of, experience, education, background, and they're like, oh, yeah, pay me, 10, 15% less than what I'm making now, and I'll be happy to take it because they're usually not going to be. But we can't get into that conversation until we get to the point where we're negotiating.
Right. And that's just in California, right? Is that in any other places where up front they're not allowed to ask your salary?
It's all state by state because it's an attempt to address the pay equity issues that exist with, women in the workplace. And it's something to try to help close the gap. So even if you're being underpaid in one position and you've never been, advanced through a salary range and let's say you haven't maxed out at your previous position, if I know that I can get you for less than what my X amount of dollars is, then a lot of companies were offering you less than X amount of dollars, even if their starting pay was more than what you were making. So if you've already disclosed that you've made, this amount of money, I can still think of, okay, well, I could probably get this person for offering 5%, which is still less than what I was going to offer someone who did not disclose their salary history.
Mm-hmm.
So state by state, it's, coming to pass that the equity issue is being addressed.
Great. That's really, really helpful. And I want to go back to something that you mentioned, which is when you're switching jobs, you're likely to want your current salary plus more. And, something that I've learned, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, is changing jobs and switching positions is a massive opportunity to get your salary higher or closer to parity or to where you want it to be. So I would love to hear your perspective on the importance of using those job switches to, maybe if you're a little bit under market, using those as an opportunity to catch up and get to where you need to be.
What I would say about switching positions is maybe you're in a position currently where, you were getting experience or you were going back to school or you were getting a certification or whatever. When those things come to be a reality and those are on your resume now, then you know that I can increase my ask because my value has gone up. Now I have an associate degree or a bachelor's degree or a certificate in this, so I can ask for more money based on those things that maybe you didn't have when you entered into your current position. So moving forward, you have to do a constant and continual reassessment of what your value is in the market. And again, what you're bringing to that organization coming in the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that can also be helpful, I don't know if this is something that you've done, but pausing every once in a while to take stock of projects and things that you've done, because it's so easy for us to get, I think, caught up sometimes in the monotony of our Monday to Friday 9 to 5 lives, and we almost forget how much we've accomplished and grown and learned. And I think that keeping track of that and taking some time to pause and reflect and think about oh, what do I know how to do now? Even if you're not even job searching, just to kind of really get crisp on what you're bringing to the table so that when it does come time to have those conversations, you really have a nice arsenal, a nice toolkit of things that you can talk about to demonstrate, why you're making the specific salary ask that you're making.
Right. And so if you're, managing a budget or you're managing a staff or you're managing anything that was not, necessarily on the job description, or you've taken on special projects or you've taken on a different role, you definitely want to keep track of those because that archive becomes very important, not just when you're in your current position, trying to negotiate if you're looking for a promotion or something like that. But also when you go back into interviewing, you want to have those types of experiential conversations with the hiring manager to say, yes, I have, experienced this, I've managed this, I've handled this, because those don't always appear on your resume and they may slip your mind. So you want to be prepared for the entire recruitment process, which includes the interview to the point where you're getting to the salary negotiation. So when you get to the negotiation, they already have in mind, oh, okay, well, we know this candidate has handled this and managed this and everything else. So we can come in with a stronger offer because we want this candidate with this experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like building the base of the pyramid. If the top of the pyramid is the talk about salary and the conversation around what you're going to get, it's like you're building the base of that pyramid in the interviews and in the conversations, talking about these things and laying the foundations for what you offer, which I imagine the more solid of a job that you're able to do doing that, then hopefully when you get to the top of the pyramid and you're talking about compensation, it's maybe an easier conversation because you've put some of those pieces in place.
Right. And it doesn't seem like your request for salary is coming out of nowhere. Like, how in the world did you get to this number?
Yeah.
It's like, well, based on my experience, and you have to be able to express that because in the interview process and when you're meeting the hiring manager, you're meeting the people who are going to make the decision about whether to, bring you on board or not, they have no idea about anything that you've done beyond what's on your resume, which is a whole other, conversation we could have in terms of resume building. But it's important to be able to vocalize those things because I think a lot of times we shy away from talking about money. It's like nobody wants to talk about money. Even in our most, intimate relationships, if you need to talk to your spouse or your partner about, well, oh, I don't want to talk about, nobody wants to talk about money ever. But you do yourself a disservice by being too polite about it, because your HR person, your finance person, the hiring manager, or whatever, they're not going to have feelings one way or another about it. You
Mhm.
need to come in and really sell yourself literally on why you're asking for that salary and stay strong with it. Again, have your justification, because you've done your comps, you've looked at what your experience is and what you can bring as far as why you're worth that salary, and then you go into the room. You come in with whatever it is you're prepared with, in order to justify saying, well, this is the amount of money that I'm looking for in order to come on board with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole art to it. And I think that I think it's very normal for that entire process, not just the salary negotiation, but the process of talking about yourself and presenting yourself in that way. I think it's normal for that to be challenging at first. And I know for me, it was something that I really had to become comfortable with and step into over time. It's not
Yes.
natural for everyone, and that's okay.
No, I don't think it's natural for anyone. Even when I was negotiating for the position that I have currently, it's nerve wracking, even if you've done it 20 times before. And it should be, because you're talking about, something very important that's going to affect your livelihood and how you live over the next, several years working for that particular company. So if you're feeling nervous or anxious about it, that's perfectly normal, because you don't know how the other party is going to react. So there's just that anticipation and that anxiousness that comes with not knowing the outcome of anything. That's totally normal. And it's not something that ever really goes away over time. So even as, far as I am into my career and having to negotiate my salary a few times, you still lose sleep. So it's nice. So don't feel bad that, it's like, you may go in there and your hands are shaking and your palms are sweaty, but it's that's par for the course.
Yeah, and not only are you really experienced and you're also a very confident person just in your life and in your career, but you also know how the mechanics of some of this work. So if it even makes you feel nervous or afraid, I would say it's really, really normal to have any kind of fear or anxiety around it.
Yes, it's it's such a big deal, even in the like I said, even in the relationships where you are really close to a person, you have an intimate relationship with someone, you don't want to talk about money with that person either. So talking to strangers about it and saying, okay, well, I'm asking for this amount because, or having to turn down an offer and counter offer, it is a lot. It's a lot to take in, because you don't want to get to a point where it's like, okay, well, am I asking for too much? Is this going to be too much? And then I don't want them to reject it or whatever. And like I said, until you know the outcome, you don't really know. But if you've done your due diligence and you're going in and you're saying, okay, this is what I have to bring, this is what I think it's worth, then they'll decide on what happens next. Because if you get to the point where you're negotiating your salary, you're the final candidate for that position. So they're going to do whatever is reasonable to bring you on. If you do something completely unreasonable, and like I said, I've seen that several times, sometimes you have to bring people back down to reality. But at the same time, they want you. So if you're negotiating the salary, it's the final step between you and not working there and working there. And even though it seems like a really huge deal, they want you to come on as much as you want to be there. And recruitment is just very difficult. So it's hard to identify really good candidates for positions. So I wouldn't want to lose a candidate because, I, being the employer, was being unreasonable or too tight with the money and saying, well, I don't know about that. They're asking for this, they're asking for an increase or whatever, and then have to start the recruitment process all over again, because that's a nightmare. That's the worst case scenario.
That's such a helpful reminder for people. And I feel like such a helpful confidence boost to know that the fact that you're having that conversation means that you're a highly desirable candidate. It basically means they want you. It's almost like,
Yes.
I mean, you have gotten a yes at that point. And yeah, that's really important to remember that for them, they don't want to backpedal. They want to get you in the spot. And
No.
so, that should give you a little bit of a boost of confidence.
Yeah, because recruitment is it's a process, and having to start all over with someone else or even going to their second choice, it's it's a lot of time and effort and resources and money that go into bringing a person on board, just from the advertising for the position, culling the herd, I guess you could say, of candidates, getting the panel together to do the interviews, making an offer, putting a good package together for that candidate. All of that takes time. So if I can get to cross the finish line with a candidate and maybe we need to adjust our offer and increase it a little bit and then we're good to go, then I'm fine with that. Like I
Yeah.
said, as long as it's not something completely unreasonable, you can pretty much negotiate anything.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And also the fear is real, right? Because you don't want to be asking too low. That's not a good feeling. And we'll get into that a little bit more, the thought of being underpaid with the listener question. And then also
Mhm.
asking too high is like not the best outcome either, right? Like you don't want
Right.
to be out there. So, when you're doing it and kind of trying to figure out what to put out there and where you want to land, it does feel sometimes like a shot in the dark. I mean, hopefully you have information, but it can be scary.
It'd be very scary. And that's why doing that work ahead of time will kind of quell some of that anxiety because it's like, okay, I know they're not going to pay me less than this, or they're not going to pay me more than that. So where do I fit into that range? And that's what you need to go in understanding.
Absolutely. Are sites like Glassdoor that kind of show ranges, are those reliable sources for, trying to figure out where your title might be?
Um, Glassdoor has some information. A lot of just the job boards in general will have a lot of that information, and you can kind of start to get some idea. And especially if you're already in the field, you can look at what some of the ranges are for positions at your own organization without, raising too many flags that you might be looking for another job. But even if you're looking for a promotion and you want to negotiate your promotional salary, that's another place to go, is to just find out from your own organization what's the range for the next step for me.
I think that's a really helpful point, and I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think it's incredibly empowering to take that into your own hands and to have a conversation with your manager or with the head of your team about that and to ask because I do think sometimes people feel like maybe that's off limits. Maybe they can't ask, but I think it's
Right.
incredibly
It's like
important.
Fort Knox, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't go behind that wall. And you're not asking for anyone individual salary. That's what's confidential. But the range that is paid for that position, just in general, or what's budgeted for that position, is usually information that, is shared throughout the organization. So you may not find out how much your coworker is making, but you can find out what the range for that particular position is for sure.
That's incredibly helpful. And I think my advice to anyone, if you're thinking about advancement within your current company and not necessarily switching jobs and changing jobs, is for the conversation both about your promotion salary and just where you are in that promotion trajectory to be as
Mhm.
open as possible about it and as
Right.
proactive as possible.
And also, if you're negotiating just for a salary increase in your current position, I've been here for X amount of years, or, I've gotten this certificate while I've been here, or I've taken on these duties and you want to go in and you want to negotiate an increase, you need to have that information as well. So there are a lot of different opportunities to talk about salary, but it's not something that is, like I said, it's not comfortable for for anybody, but at the same time, you don't want to hold yourself back from having that conversation because it's like, well, I'm too scared to say anything or whatever, because it's still going to be what it is. You're either going to get a yes or a no, but you're never going to know that until you ask.
Absolutely. And I think regardless of the outcome, I think asking is an incredibly empowering thing to do.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of, confidence and empowerment that comes just from the ask, just putting yourself in a position to be out there asking for, a certain salary. It's like, okay, well, I think it's time that I try to, increase my salary a little bit. And it's always better for me. Um, Not always, but I would say most of the time better for me to do that with my internal candidates. Cause like I said, it's difficult to find someone on the open market who's going to fit into that job position and be able to, perform the duties versus hiring someone internally or promoting someone internally that already knows your organization, they're already used to your culture, and they're just adjusting their role there. So if they're coming in asking for, an increase based on this or that, it's definitely something that I take into consideration.
Absolutely. And, one thing that is a really big issue is the pay gap across genders. And then if you subcut within women and, look at Latino women and women of color, the pay gap is even broader. And I think
Right.
that, one thing that I would encourage anyone listening to do is, even if it feels kind of scary and like a big thing to go and ask for more salary, because it is really scary. That's normal. You can start with a small step, right? You can just
Right.
start like poking around lightly, looking at job boards, like you said, looking at Glassdoor. Maybe if you're feeling courageous, asking someone who you trust and, explaining to them that you're just trying to figure out if you're being fairly compensated. Because
For sure.
yeah, I think as women, we have incredible power to proactively try to close that gap.
Right. And it's really going to be up to us to do that, because if it's one of those things where a lot of it is because there's not a lot of conversation around it. So having the conversation about it, just, through your podcast or through, other avenues in a casual atmosphere, translates to what's going to happen once you get into your job environment. I think what we have to understand as women is that, you're just as capable and you're just as qualified as the next person who is coming in. And trust me, there are enough people out there who are not shy to ask about money on an
Mhm.
ongoing basis with no qualms about it whatsoever. So while it may be uncomfortable and while it may be even foreign in some situations where it's like, gosh, I've never asked about my salary before, or even talked about my salary before, you just have to jump in there. I always say a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So you have to put yourself in a situation where you're not, making a lot of noise and making a lot of ruckus about it, but you're at least having a realistic conversation about compensation, because that is what's going to follow you for a long time in your career, whether you stay in the current position that you have or not.
Absolutely. One of my biggest learnings has been like once I truly realized, like what you said, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it as squeaky as I can possibly get because
Right.
literally, and the show is called The Art of Speaking Up. Literally, it can be as simple as that. And the fear is real. But, this is where, like, for example, having a trusted friend or someone who can just give you a little emotional push too and make you
Mhm.
feel empowered can be really helpful.
Yeah. And like, we said before, it's not easy. It's not like, hey, I'm just going to walk into my boss's office and, have this conversation, because you don't want to come in and, well, I'm going to make demands and I need to get this or I'm leaving, because nobody likes to be pushed into a corner. But if you're having a real professional, adult grown up conversation with somebody like, hey, you know what? I was looking at my salary and I was debating, whether or not to even come in and ask about it, but I just thought that I would come in and maybe we can have a conversation about, a possible movement. And you're not going to go in and ask for a 25% increase, because that's just that's just never going to happen. Like I said, positions aren't budgeted that way. But if you're asking for a smaller increase, you're looking at it on an annual basis or based on maybe some additional education or certifications that you've had or just additional experience, then by all means, at least go in there and talk about it. And just another point, like, I've never had anyone fired for asking for more money. Like, nobody's ever been terminated because it's like, oh, so and so came in to ask for more money. We're going to just terminate that person. That's not how it works. They may turn you down and they may say, well, that's not in the budget, or that's not, what we were projecting for this quarter or for this fiscal year or whatever, to have an increase in salary and benefits, because that's an employer's biggest expense in their budget. But put that conversation out there, because you never know. You never know until you ask.
Exactly. And maybe another strategy too to help someone pump themselves up and feel mentally ready is you can think about it as, you might have a team one day, right? And you might have to advocate for the people on your team and hopefully for women on your team.
Mm-hmm.
And you can think about, asking for yourself now and getting past that fear and just pushing yourself to do it. Think of it as a training ground for the future when you're going to be an incredible leader and you're going to be advocating for your team and doing what you can as a leader to pay it forward.
Right. And don't let those opportunities pass you by because, like I said, there are enough people in your workplace where you are currently that are having those conversations that you don't even know about. So, all salary negotiation is confidential. So if you're, the person who's sitting 5 feet from you, if they're in your boss's office asking for more money and getting it, don't let yourself get left behind because you're too fearful to have that conversation. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's easy to let that fear take over, like, I don't want to rock the boat, but again, you have to look at what your organization is doing financially, where their budget is, are there shortfalls, you're not going to go and ask for a salary increase when, you heard that there might be layoffs or something like that. But at the same time, if you know that, your company is stable or it's prospering or whatever, then let's just have a little conversation, let's just see where it ends up.
Absolutely. And it can be so easy to think that you're the only one that's afraid and be like, oh, well, like
Right.
I can't ask because everyone else is like so bold and I can't, I'm scared. No,
Right.
we're all scared. We're all scared.
Well, I remember we were hiring for one of my managers at one of my old jobs, and he came in and he was talking to the panel, and the entire time he was sweating bullets the entire interview. So we're all sitting there like, just breathe, take it easy, because we had gotten down to just two candidates, and he knew he was one of two, and he was just pouring sweat by the time the thing was over. But that's what happens to people, even the most confident. And he had so much experience, and he was so well rounded. He was actually exactly what we were looking for. So we ended up extending an offer to him. But even when you feel like you're the best thing going for that particular position, or you want to come in and make a good impression or whatever, even with all his experience and education, he was still a nervous wreck. And it's difficult to get out of your own head sometimes during those conversations because it's uncomfortable, but you'll survive. It takes a little doing.
Yeah, I really love that you shared that story too, because I think it's so human and so normal to get nervous. And I think it's really a place where we can beat ourselves up a lot when that happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, I must have tanked that. And I'm sure he probably left thinking, because he was like soaking wet by the time he by the time he left. So I'm sure he probably thought, well, there went that, and that was like whatever. But you could just see the sweat like beating off of his forehead and everything. But we ended up, but he was the best candidate, and he wouldn't have gotten that far in the process if he wasn't going to be capable of handling the position, but in those moments when you're trying to just come across as really composed, but inside you're like shaking like a leaf or
Yeah.
something like that, totally normal.
Yeah, and
Totally normal.
everyone has a different personality, right? Like some people
Right.
are cool as a cucumber and some people aren't. But what I would want to emphasize for anyone who's listening is you don't have to be the cool as a cucumber type of person to go crazy far in your career. Everyone can do it.
Right. And even if I'm coming across as cool, I'm probably falling apart inside, where it's just like, okay, you may have learned some, techniques to kind of keep your exterior a little more, you know, looking like you're a little calmer than you actually are. And that takes some practice as well. But for the most part, it's so nerve wracking. Interviews are so nerve wracking. Talking about money is even more nerve wracking. So, give yourself a break in that regard. If you're nervous about it, that's completely understandable. But don't let that nervousness or that discomfort, kind of take you out of the game completely.
Absolutely. I love that message. It just, I think it's easy to tell yourself that because you're not perfect and because you get nervous or whatever it is, it's just so easy to say, well, like, oh, I must not be good enough because someone else can come in and just be like so charismatic and smooth
Mhm.
during the interview.
They're nervous too.
Yeah,
Trust me. In
absolutely.
every candidate that I've ever had, if you're not nervous in an interview, then I don't trust that either, So it's like I'm expecting you to be nervous, so I try to make people as comfortable as possible. I'll ask some kind of ice-breaking questions, did you have any trouble finding the building? How was the traffic getting here, especially when I used to work in LA? And to just kind of break the ice and let people get a little comfortable, because I want people to come in and be at their best when I'm having conversations with them, so I could see what they're really all about.
Hmm.
If if they come in and the environment's too rigid or it's too cold or it's, and people are put off, and you already know that they're nervous, so you don't need to make it any worse for them. So I always try to just kind of set a more relaxed tone so I can ask my questions and they can ask me questions and we can have a conversation more so than just a rapid fire Q&A.
Yeah, well, you sound like a very generous and kind and empathetic interviewer. Some interviewers are not as amazing as you are.
Well, it's a skill, on both sides of the table because I've been, obviously on both sides of the table, so I know I'm nervous too as an interviewer, and I think that message gets lost sometimes where it's like I'm just as nervous as you are because I want to make sure that I've gotten enough information to make a good decision. So if you aren't comfortable sharing your information with me or you feel like the environment was too, you know, restrictive or too cold, or I didn't have enough time to express myself or get to my point, then I have lost out on that experience as well.
Mhm.
Because there may be things that obviously aren't on your resume or they weren't on your application or they weren't in your cover letter that would be beneficial for me to know as a hiring manager. But I can't get to that if I'm not doing a good job of interviewing.
I think that makes so much sense. As a candidate, one thing that's been helpful for me is to try to make some kind of human connection with the person. And if they open with small talk, like actually really try to connect, like actually try to build that bond. Or even if they jump straight in, like, whether it's like a small joke or eye contact or body language or something, I think if you
Anything.
can, yeah, exactly.
Anything.
If you can facilitate that, I think it can help both people feel more at ease and have that conversation go a little bit more smoothly.
Right. And as the interviewer, there's an expectation that you're going to, get all the words right and that you're not going to stumble when you're talking or stuff, and there's all these things that people think happen on the other side of the table. And it's like, we're also having an episode underneath the surface, where it's like, oh, I want to make sure that I, ask good questions. Really good, well-crafted interview questions are also, you know, a lost art. Um, I've been in a lot of interviews where the questions, I think to myself, what? What are you even asking me right now? What does that mean? And I'll ask and I'll be like, well, are you asking me, blah, 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 or whatever? Because the interviewers also have to do a good job of preparing for that interview. And
Hmm.
if you're not asking specific pointed questions about that particular position and you're using the same questions that you've used for the last 10 years or that you use for every classification in your organization or for every job position that's there, you're really wasting the time, everybody's time. And so it's really important to craft good questions so that as you go through the process and by the time you get to the point where you're ready to make an offer, that you have as much information as possible about that candidate because you've done all that you needed to do leading up to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people should definitely feel open to clarify a question. It's not like you're not in control at all. You can jump in and say, like, hey, is this what you're thinking? Are you thinking more in this direction for this question?
Right. And then, just to clarify, because you want to be as specific and as pointed as you can in your responses, and also make sure that that the question that they're asking you is what you really heard. It's like, so if I understand, you're asking me about this or you're asking me about that, and then you answer the question, and then sometimes I even say, did that answer your question? And they'll say yes or no, or they'll say, well, I was looking for more information about this, or this, or they can ask, more probing or follow-up questions. But it's important to think of that whole process as you're interviewing them too, so when I go into an interview, I want to know what that person I'm going to be working for is like. And if they're going to be, amenable to me asking questions or getting clarification, or if they're like, hey, man, if you didn't understand it the first time, I don't know what to tell you. It's like, I don't know that I want to work for somebody like that either, but somebody who's really going to understand that, like I said, we're both nervous. It's not a comfortable situation, but let's try to get through it as best we can.
I think that's so helpful. And I'm glad that we went into some of the interview stuff too, in addition to the salary stuff, because it's all part of the same process.
Right.
Absolutely cool. Well, I think I'm going to go into the listener question if you're ready for it.
I think I'm ready.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll read you the question and then I'll turn it over to you. So the question is, The listener asks, I just learned that I am making less than someone on my team in the same exact position. There is not a huge difference in our performance, at least not one that I'm aware of. I always get positive feedback on my work. What is going on here? And is there any action I can take? I am feeling bummed out, but I also don't know exactly what I should do. Sincerely, less money, more problems.
That's a good question. It's really not a simple answer necessarily because there are a lot of different factors, like we've talked about, that go into compensation and determining where somebody is going to be in a range. So even if someone is making a little bit more money than you, there are other considerations like how long have you both worked there? If that person has more seniority or that person has more experience or a different background, then they're going to be compensated differently. And it's not just what you get as in terms of feedback and in terms of your annual review or quarterly review or whatever time frame that they're using, but really where are both of you and did they negotiate that? So that's something to also take into consideration, another thing that we're talking about today, because you'll find out, like I said, every individual's salary is confidential, but if you find out, hey, this person is making more money than me, you need to figure out what some of the other factors are and how it's the same or different than the position that you're in. And not just the position in terms of the title or the classification. They may be doing some other things that you don't know about. And they may be taking on some additional responsibilities that you're not, aware of. And there's really just 100 different things that it could be. It's not always an issue about fairness or something like, oh, well, I should be making the same amount of money as the person sitting next to me. Because like I said, everybody has their own story and their own background. So what you could do is to possibly talk to your manager if you're both in the same section or division or whatever, and just ask those questions. You can't ask about that other person's salary, but you can ask about your own and say, well, if you do find that you have a comparable background, you've been there the same amount of time or whatever, and your understanding is that, somebody's getting paid more while you're getting paid less, is there a way to close that gap possibly? Because you still want to approach it professionally. You can't really get into that, coworker's business too deep because that's not really what the issue is per se. It's really about what you're being, the level that you're being compensated at and the conversations you need to have around your own salary.
Yeah, absolutely. You can almost look at it as you kind of skip the step of having to do market research. Like you just got a data point, right? And now you can kind of go into that process that Regina was talking about, which is asking for a raise.
Right. And it's just like on any other team. If you look at a baseball team, a football team, a basketball team, or whatever, different players are compensated differently, but they all have to play their position. And it may be because one is a franchise player, one is, somebody who doesn't get as many minutes, and they all make different contributions. You just want to make sure that you're being compensated appropriately for your contribution, but not in relation to what your neighbor's making, because that's going to drive you crazy. Because you may never make what the person next to you is making because of a number of different factors. So don't just think of it in terms of, well, this person's making more money, because there's always going to be somebody making more money than you. Mm-hmm. But what are you bringing to the table and what's your individual contribution? Because that's what you go into the negotiation, armed with. It's like, well, I've been here for X amount of years, or I bring this to the table or whatever. Because the minute that you start making it about someone else is the minute that your manager or the person is going to get turned off. Mm-hmm. They're not going to really hear what you have to say because it's just going to sound like sour grapes. So even if that other person is doing a great job, you're doing a great job or whatever, make that conversation about you and your contribution versus trying to bring your coworker into the conversation.
I love that so much. It's like they're the catalyst for you to take action, but everything moving forward it's about you and your value and what you're bringing to the table, like Regina said.
Right. Don't let your coworker be the focus, because they're over there minding their own business. They don't even, they don't even know what you're talking about as far as, well, this person's making more money. It's like, say what now? But yeah. When you go in to talk to your manager, it's like, well, this is about me, and if I understand, correctly, I'm just in here to negotiate a salary, but don't base it on the fact that your coworker is making more money, because that just becomes more drama. And they just like, well, hey, you've been here 3 years, they've been here 6 years, boom, end of conversation. So don't set yourself up for a failure.
I love that. That's so, so helpful. Thank you so much, Regina.
Anytime.
And now I'm going to go into the closing questions, my favorite part. So, the first of the closing questions is about the title of the podcast, which is The Art of Speaking Up. Now, this could be in relation to the topics we've been talking about, or it could just be more general. But I would love to hear your thoughts on speaking up, why it's important, what it means to you, anything that you would want to share with people who are listening.
I think that you over time find your voice, and when I was younger in my career, I could look back on some things and say, gosh, I wish I would have handled that differently. I wish I would have said that differently. And you learn from those experiences. And when you are passed over for something, or you don't get something that you feel like you were capable of doing, or you were the best candidate for, or whatever, let that be a learning experience. I've had a few friends recently that are jumping back into the job market and looking for things, and they've interviewed and they haven't gotten positions, and they're like, it was down to two, and it was me and this other person, and then I didn't get it, and they get really discouraged. And I tell them, it's you're not being rejected for. I always think you're not being rejected for something, you're being redirected towards something else. So whether whatever it is you believe in terms of how your life plays out and your connection to the things around you, it's not always a straight path. You're going to have peaks and valleys. So there's some times when, yeah, I nailed it. It was great. And I can think of times in my career where I know I went in and oh my gosh, I killed that interview. They still didn't want me. They still passed me over for something else. Back to the drawing board. So don't be eternally discouraged by that setback. And it may not be that you not being selected had anything to do with you at all. A lot of times people, they pre-select who they want, or they're looking for someone who is at a different place in their career, or has a different affect or a different personality or whatever. And it's nothing personal. And it's difficult to not take it personal because it's like a personal rejection. But at the same time, that's when you can rediscover things about your approach to a situation. It's like, well, was this on me or was this on them? What could I have done differently, or what can I learn from this experience? Because it's all a learning experience, and one of the quotes that I ran across a couple months ago was that, rock bottom will teach you lessons that mountaintops never will. And you have to really be down there sometimes and get that, redirection to really look at what you're doing. And as a hiring person, I'll have candidates that are probably great, but either they didn't take the time to put their resume together really well and present themselves really well, or they come into the interview super duper extra casual in their mannerisms, like, they're not, ready to be in a professional environment. So it's really all about putting your best foot forward, whatever that might be. And even if you don't get that position, it's just because it wasn't, you have to believe in timing. You have to believe in being in the right place at the right time, because there have been positions where I've gotten when I wasn't looking for a job, the opportunities that have come across my path where it's like, oh, I didn't even, and those worked out. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, okay, that's why I didn't get that other thing. Because when I moved from Los Angeles back to Northern California a couple years ago, I wasn't really looking to move outside of LA, but I was looking around LA and nothing was kind of working out. And then probably a month after I got my last rejection letter, the opportunity to move back to Northern California, where I was before and where a lot of my friends and family are, came up. And I was like, oh, okay, that's why I didn't get any of those other positions. So you have to kind of look at the long game, and not think of each individual situation that you didn't get selected for as the end of the world. Because if you talk to any person who is in a position where they're successful and they love their job or whatever, it's not because they always had these open doors. It's because they did have the door slammed in their face, one time or several times or whatever, that caused them to kind of rethink where they were and what they wanted to do and go, and they move on from there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. Even now, it got me thinking about times I interviewed for something and didn't end up getting it. And now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so good. Like that didn't work out. It would have changed the course of my life. And I don't know if in the direction I would want it
Right.
to.
Right.
Yeah.
And you would be in that situation. And a lot of times you build something up, you're like, oh man, if I get this job or if I move to this place or I have this other situation going on, then that's going to be the best thing ever. And then you do get that job and it's like, well, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Or this is, it could be any number of things where it's like, yeah, this is not, wow, this is not my ideal. So you don't want to idealize something that you have no idea about and say, oh no, this is going to be great. And, this is going to be the be all end all, because it's probably not, because you have a long career ahead of you. Regardless of where you are in your career, there are other things that are going on in your life, in your home life, in your social life, that you need to also pay attention to and not just cleave too tightly onto one particular opportunity, because that's not really within your control. Like I said, you could put your best foot forward and still not get there. It's just it's a lot of different factors that go into play, and then you find out, oh well, this person got hired because of this, or this person got hired because of that, and that doesn't really matter. Don't let that discourage you. It's like, okay, I'm gonna be mad for a minute. I might cry, I might fall apart, and that's fine. Go through your grieving process and your mourning process, but don't don't stay there and don't live there, but let yourself feel your feelings and then get back into the game.
hmm And, so like what you were saying, so much of hiring is about fit. And so, in a way, when it's meant to work, it will.
Right. And it's, I see a lot of candidates come in. I was, the last several positions I've helped a lot of our um, different division managers hire staff. And, I'm looking for certain things and they're looking for certain things. And then we'll kind of talk about, each candidate as they come and go. And it's not just always whether or not you as the candidate fit into what that posted job description was. It's like, okay, I have X amount of years of experience, I have a certain degree or whatever. It's really about your soft skills as well. And I personally place just as much value on your soft skills and your ability to be good with customers, good with your coworkers, good with the public, especially as an HR professional, as I do on your certifications and your education, because I can put you in a position and essentially give you enough training on the job to understand, you're coming in with a little experience or education or whatever, but you're still going to have to learn some things on the job. But if you're coming in with some advanced degree in human resources and you have 20 years of experience and whatever, but you're salty or you're too difficult to deal with, then I'm not interested. I'm really interested in that well-rounded candidate where, okay, well, this person may not have as much experience and they're just, getting through their certificate program or whatever. But those soft skills and the way that I connect with that person and their personality and their outlook and their demeanor is exactly what I'm looking for, because you can't teach that.
I love that too. And I think soft skills are really a place where both women can shine, but also sometimes we forget how much power and capability we have in this area. And I think it's just there's so much potential, I think, for women as a whole in the professional world to continue to up level by connecting with those soft skills, because I believe that there's still so much that we have to offer that's totally untapped right now.
Absolutely. Because we went through a whole, generation of change in the workplace where we were getting there, everything's going to be automated and we're technologically advanced and this, that, and the other. But we lost a lot of the human side of what goes on in the workplace. And getting back to that now where it's like, okay, well, everybody's digitized and whatever, you still have to deal with the humanity of what goes on in the workplace. There still has to be that element of caring for your organization, caring for the people that work there and helping them, maintain and come to work and be in a good mood and be in a good environment from a cultural perspective. So if your workplace is too much of a grind and there's no compassion there, people come in with their whole lives. So outside of work, you're going through separating from your partner, you're, losing out financially, you have too much debt, you're going through a custody battle or whatever. All of that also comes into the workplace. So being able to see our employees as human beings that are experiencing whatever it is they're experiencing also is just as important as production, as what they're doing to produce and what they're doing for a living for you, because you can't really have one without the other. You can't just grind and grind and grind and hope that that person stays around, and you're not really taking into account the other things that they might be experiencing and being compassionate toward that as well.
I love that. Thank you so much. You crushed the speaking up question. I feel like this was an entire mini interview. That was awesome. I loved it. For the final question, this is basically where I give the guests the floor to share, whatever they would want women to hear. So this show was inspired by some of the difficult times I've been through in my career. And so I like to use this last part as a chance for the guests to talk to anyone who might need like some encouragement or who might be in a difficult place, and just share whatever you think would be important for that person to hear.
I think what I touched on before, as far as when I've had setbacks and difficulties, is when I've learned the most valuable lessons. It's very easy to be satisfied and complacent when things are going well, and it's like, okay, well, I got this going on and this is covered and whatever. But nobody's life stays on that path for any great length of time. You need to be prepared for what's coming around the corner at you. So if you find yourself in a position where you're low or you're discouraged or you're feeling defeated, then let yourself have those feelings. I think we often try to say, oh, well, just cheer up, or this is okay, and this will, get better or whatever. But okay, but I just found out that I didn't get that job, 4 hours ago. So I'm not over it. I'm not over it yet. I need a moment. And take that moment, take that day, take that week, take a couple weeks, especially if you were really looking forward to having some type of change happen in your life that's maybe not happening right now. And there are other reasons why that's not happening. So if you're being redirected to something else and you've, experienced that setback or that downturn, let that be what it is, and let yourself be as, mad, upset, unhappy about it or whatever, but give yourself also a limit, I guess. So what I found myself doing, it's like, okay, I'm going to be mad about this for the next 48 hours. I'm going to take this weekend to just be, hurt, or mad or whatever. But come Monday, I'm going to get back in there. I'm going to, and I would have a list of things that I was ready to do. But I also allowed myself to just go through that valley, because it's not that simple especially when you express it to somebody else and it's like, no, but I was really looking forward to, having this other promotion or this other opportunity. And now I'm not just disappointed, but I'm just flat, and let yourself be flat. Because I think that's a part of the human experience. I think it's good for your mental health to have some of those down days where it's just like, I'm just down today and I'm just going to stay down. I'm not going to try to rush myself to feel better, because then then you're mad at everything. Then it's just kind of like, why is this? I saw this other thing the other day that says, sometimes you get so mad, you're like, why is this floor on the floor? And so it's just like you get mad about just the most innocuous bunches of nonsense, and because you're spraying that those negative emotions all over everything in your life. But if you let yourself just really experience that negativity and get it out of your system, then you can move on from it, But if you rush it too much, it's still going to be there, but you want it to dissipate a little bit, You don't want to go through the rest of your week or month or year with a high concentration of negativity. And then look forward to the next thing, focus on some of the other areas of your life. When I was having issues, in some of the positions that I've had where I was like, I feel a little stuck here. I've tried to interview for other positions and I didn't get them. I started other hobbies. I went back to school. I started powerlifting, and so those were some of the things that helped me deal with some of the stuff that maybe wasn't going so great. but I feel like I had control over in other areas of my life. Because you have to look at your life as a whole, as a broad spectrum. And it's not just work, it's not just your relationship, it's not just your finances, it's not just any one particular thing, because everything in your life is dynamic. It's going to change, it's going to wax and wane. And sometimes you're riding high in one area and you're low in its other area, and you just need to try to find that balance throughout.
I love that. Thank you so much, Regina.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Regina. And if you want to hear more from her, check out her podcast, which is called Office Politics Radio. In her own words, the show is about helping listeners create and achieve more harmony at work in spite of the politics. And it is filled with interesting and useful information on some of the same things that we do on this show, how to get by and be happy and at peace at work. I will link her podcast in the show notes. And if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if this show is adding to your life in any way, if it's helpful, if you feel like I've given something to you by creating this show and putting it out there, you can, if you want to, give something back to me very, very easily just by rating the show or leaving a review in the iTunes store. It helps me know that people are listening, and it helps me know that people like the show. And it honestly just makes me feel really, really good. I don't know exactly what it does for the show's growth, but when I know someone's listening and enjoying the content, it really gives me this crazy fuel to keep going. So if you're enjoying the show, and if now feels like the right time to give back a spark of joy to me, I would be so appreciative of that. And I also wanted to let you know that I think this topic of salary and negotiating and our confidence and our self-worth around what we make is super important. And after working on this episode, I realized that this is a topic that I want to hit on more on the show. So you'll probably see more content around this coming your way. Always feel free to get in touch with me. I'll put my contact information in the show notes. If you have suggestions or questions or things that would be helpful for you when it comes to the topic of salary and money and asking for more. And if there are places where you're feeling stuck, or you could use some help or some mentorship in terms of navigating all of this, because it can be super hard and complicated, I've created a Facebook group. It's a private group, so you can only see what's in there if you go in the group. And I'm hoping that if there's anyone out there who's feeling stuck or who needs help, you can use that as a safe space to ask for help. And I will do my best to pop in there and help you wherever I can. The reason that I started this podcast is because I have this crazy unbridled passion for empowering women, and I love mentoring women, and I love helping women find those things about them that make them strong and use those strengths to propel their careers forward. And I do it in every way I possibly can, and this podcast is one incredible way for me to reach more people. And so if there's anything that I can do to help you, I would love to. If you want to join the Facebook group, you can find it just by going on Facebook and searching for The Art of Speaking Up in the search bar, and it'll pull up the group. It'll ask you a couple of questions before you join, because I want to make sure that everybody who joins is actually a listener of the podcast, so it can be a safe space. And if there's anything I can help you with, or that the show can help you with, that's a place where you can let me know. I want to thank you for listening. I feel really grateful to be able to reach you. And I feel really grateful that you found the show and that it's helpful and that you've made it all the way here to the end. I hope that this new year has been treating you well so far. And I really hope that this show, as I release more and more episodes, can help you grow and evolve and maybe see a version of yourself, a stronger version of yourself that was always there, but you needed just a little help or a little bit of permission to fully see and fully recognize. So have an amazing day. Have an amazing week. And as you know, by now, I will catch you next week. Bye.